This is Macro Analytics, delivering frank conversations on global macroeconomics and market analysis, outside the mainstream, featuring discussions and debates between Gordon T. Long, publisher and editor of GordonTLong.com, and his guests. The content of this discussion is strictly the opinion of the participants. It is in no way a solicitation for business, nor is it to be considered investment advice of any sort. Always consult a registered investment advisor before making any investment decision. These discussions are extremely hard-hitting and terribly frank, and parental discretion is advised. Now, on to the show.
Good morning. I'm Gord Long with GordonTLong.com. As part of our ongoing series on financial repression, I have Mish Shedlock joining us from Chicago. Mish is a very well-respected and prolific writer on the web and publisher of the Global Economic Analysis blogspot.com. That's a mouthful, Mish, but welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back on with you, Gordon. People can just do a Google search for Mish. That's the easy way to find me, M-I-S-H.
In actual fact, that's how I do find you. The other four letters, and I have you every time. Mish, this is part of our financial repression series, but we've talked a few times now on financial repression, so I'll refer our listeners to the previous videos we've done in our archives. Last time we had you on, we talked about the pension crisis in America that financial repression is contributing to in a major way. Today I hoped that we talk about the state of Illinois problems, the public service pension problem, and absolutely about Greece, because I just saw your latest post on that, and we've got to talk about Greece, but all in the context of financial repression. So let's talk about what's going on in the state of Illinois.
Illinois pension plans are funded on average something like 39%, some a little bit better than that, some a lot worse than that. I believe the judicial one is the worst. And of course, that creates a conflict of interest when judges just ruled in Illinois on pension plans. They said that a bill that Governor Rauner signed no longer works, so it's back to the drawing board. That was supposed to save Illinois about $2 billion a year, so that became another $2 billion that they're not in the hole. Of course, judges are in on it, actuaries are in on it. Everyone, the rating agencies are all in on it. Moody's cut Chicago, downgraded it to junk. Mayor Rahm Emanuel put up a big stink about it. S&P and Fitch did not cut Chicago to junk. So what does the city do? The city went out, removed Moody's from rating its bonds, and instead hired another third party to rate their bonds. So this is rate shop whoring is what I call it. And the same process goes on with actuary whoring, because no city wants to admit that its pension is as underfunded as they are. So when the actuaries come out and say that on average these things are 39% funded, you can pretty much figure, Gordon, that's probably the best they could come up with, not the worst.
And Illinois is at the bottom of the list, if not the second from the bottom in all the states in the nation.
I believe it is at the bottom. Chicago has its own problems. A lot of the police and fire, have contracts that let them retire at age 50 and collect a full pension if they put in 20 years of service or whatever the requirement was. What do? They collect their pension, retiring in theory, but they go take another government job with another agency, accruing benefits for another pension. This is what's going on in Chicago right now. The whole system is untenable. The taxpayers in Cook County in Chicago are paying 50% of the money that goes in is not for services, not for pickup, not for libraries, not for schools. It actually goes, 50%, something like that, goes to interest and pension obligations. So Nuveen did a study a few weeks ago and came to the conclusion that to shore up Chicago's pension system, they would need to hike property taxes in Illinois by about 50%. Gordon, on a $600,000 house, my property taxes are already $14,000 a year. So don't you think that's pretty steep?
Mish, I have to interrupt you because last time we were on, you mentioned something similar. And I got emails from people in New Jersey saying, what is he complaining about? They're twice as high here. So
New Jersey, I think, is one of the one or maybe two states that are worse on property taxes than Illinois. Illinois uses all of that money supposedly for schools, but you know where it's really going? It's going to the pension plans of public teachers.
Yeah, Miss, there's no question we're going to see an explosion in property taxes, and that's going to be driven by underfunded pensions at the town, state, municipal, and a state level, or at least the city level. Because what I'm seeing, at least in New England, is all these towns it's pay-go. They did not put money aside for the pensions. My little town, we have 3 chief of police, 2 fire chiefs, and 55 constables. On any given day, we may have 16 constables and one of the others. All the rest of them are on the payroll as retired, but there was never any money. So the budget's just going through the roof. What are you going to do? Yeah. The only thing out is property taxes.
Or bankruptcy. There's a law pending in the Illinois legislature to allow cities to go bankrupt. If they pass that, I've already figured 7 cities are immediately going to go under. Maywood, Sauk Village, Blue Island, Country Club Hills, Dalton, Harvey, and Robbins were the 2 I just added. Actually, I didn't do the analysis on the first 5. Someone else did, and he and I sent that and said, look at these 2, and he goes, your intuition's correct. I think there's a number of other cities in Illinois that are going to go under eventually, but we're looking at ones that are in immediate trouble because they can't pay the bills. And unlike a corporate bankruptcy, where all you have to do is prove you're insolvent and you can declare bankruptcy, a municipal bankruptcy is not so easy. You actually have to prove you can't meet current expenses. So those cities that I mentioned, well, one of them protested, I can't remember which one, said that we shouldn't be on that list. The others didn't answer at all. So they just did not return questions. But this problem has been looming for years. And Illinois is not doing these cities any good by not letting them go bankrupt and shed these obligations. So what's happening is there's no money for police, there's no money for fire, there's no money for garbage pickup. So these cities are now shells of what they used to be, decent middle-class cities. Now they are bankrupt in every way, shape, or form, but they can't declare it because Illinois law doesn't allow it. This is one of the problems. Illinois legislature is governed by 2 people, Speaker of the House Mike Madigan, John Cullerton, President of the Senate. These 2 guys are, pro-staunch union, and even though some of the policies they are doing is actually to the detriment of the unions, it's what the unions think they want. So these are the policies that get passed or don't pass. Every piece of legislature in Illinois has to pass through these 2 guys' hands, and if one of them says no, doesn't pass. And so here we are stuck. They're playing a game with Ronner of, okay, what services are you going to cut? So they're demanding more tax hikes. We've already seen what these tax hikes have done. People are exiting the state of Illinois for Indiana, for Texas, for anywhere, for even Wisconsin, for the bordering states, and also Texas, just to escape the high taxes here in Illinois. The idea that raising property taxes, hiking taxes in general, to cover this select group of undeserving people who can retire at age 50 with full pensions is absolutely galling. One of the worst examples or one of the best examples of financial repression in a bad sense that you can find.
Yeah, it's amazing, Mission. You know, you really look at the pension laws in terms of taxation and how it's calculated without getting into the detail. But when you take the calculation, anything over $33,000 a year, separate from the pension, is taxed at 55%, and anything over $44,000 is taxed at 85% of the pension. So we're actually, and this is for the average person who has a pension out there. So you're forced to go and find another job because Social Security is not enough. Nobody's got a pension. And the moment you hit that 33, what's the poverty line? 55% of it goes away. The exception seems to be if you're a public servant.
Yes.
That's what really irks me.
They're supposed to be public servants. They're serving themselves. Corrupt politicians are in bed with union leaders and corrupt, political figures. The interesting thing here is they're blaming it on Ronner. Ronner's been governor, since the last election in a year? This problem has been brewing actually for decades, but really expanded probably 10 years ago. And in every contract, the unions negotiate for higher benefits. And so this isn't Ronner's fault. He inherited it. It was caused by unsound promises by Mayor Daley way back when. He's now gone. Daniel is in his place. He's in a very rough spot, but his hands are tied by the city council, yet there's some things that he could do. He protested when Governor Ronner actually proposed that the way out for the Chicago Board of Education, which has an immediate funding crisis, and actually, in addition to the cities, the Chicago Board of Education would be right up there on the top of my list as a place that needs to go bankrupt. But he protested that. Instead, he wanted more money from Illinois. What? He wants downstate Illinois to bail out Chicago. He wants the suburbs to bail out Chicago. They didn't agree to these pension plans, but that's what they're asking for. Everywhere. Everyone wants the state to give it more money. Guess what? The state is itself is $6 billion in the hole. Where's the money going to come from? And what happens when Nuveen did that study and said that property taxes needed to rise by 50%? It was based on Illinois' pension plan assumptions, which I believe are absurd. They range from 7 to 8%. I don't believe with the long bond, with 10-year bond trading around 2%, that you can come close to those guarantees. And in spite of this massive rally since 2007 in the stock market, Illinois pension plans have become more underfunded every year but one during that time frame. So what happens to Illinois when if stocks just stay flat for 7 years? Now, I don't think they're going to stay flat for 7 years. I think I agree with those who think Hussman's one, and there's another name it can't come to my mind right now. Oh, Jeremy T. Grantham thinks that we're in for 7 years of negative returns on average, based on the PEs of stocks at this ratio. And you know what? He said that before, and everyone laughed at him. And guess what happened? We had a stock crash in 2007. Here we are, 7 years later, stock market back in bubble territory. He's saying the same thing. No one believes him again. No one's believing me. No one's believing Hussman.
These muni bonds and these games that they're playing to fund operating expenses with the munis, which I believe is illegal.
Yes.
And I'm being polite in how I just said that, I think. But they're getting it away. At some point, the muni bonds are going to explode.
What they're doing is floating general obligation bonds that are supposed to be used for long-term investment projects.
And not getting called out on it.
And instead, they play budget games. They'll move it in this pool and then move it out. But the bottom line is it's going to pay for immediate service.
Well, at some point, because this is not just unique to Chicago and Illinois, across the nation, we've got serious, serious pension problems, and more are going to be forced into this, or as you say, into bankruptcy. But we could have a real tilt in the muni bond market because of these kinds of problems. And we already know we've got issues in the bond market overall.
Yeah, right now, what everyone believes is, I just gave you 7 cities. Let's assume that there's a dozen more that are at immediate risk, okay? So, there's 1,000 cities in Illinois, so that's just a small percentage. However, what happens if a Chicago or a Rockford needs to do this? You can't tell me that that's not going to rattle the municipal bond market like hell. And various Chicago groups, not the city itself, right now are already in trouble. The Board of Education is one, Park District is another one. These individual taxing bodies are going to be the ones to go first, but it's not going to stop there. It's going to cascade. Once cities figure out that they can shed their pension obligations in bankruptcy, they're going to go for it, except for one problem, and that's what we've seen in California. The city administrators, the mayors, the village presidents all collect their own pensions. So they don't want to go into. So what they've done in California, in Stockton, is the federal government, and bankruptcy is a federal process, not a state process. The states get to choose to allow it or not allow it. California allows it. But once they allow it, it goes to federal court. And the federal courts in California have ruled 4 times, 4 different cities, that these cities can shed pension obligations. Guess what? They didn't. They instead screwed the bondholders. And because they didn't reduce their pension obligations, my prediction, Gordon, is all of these cities in California are someday going to be back in bankruptcy court, and maybe at that time the court will force them to take a pension cut. But right now, you got the legislature, you got all the representatives, you've got the mayors, the village presidents are all in on the scheme. They're all collecting a pension themselves. So, do they want those pensions to take a haircut? Nope. So it's all part of the financial repression network. Who gets a piece of the pie and who has to pay?
Well, now that we understand how they're screwing the bondholders, how tax gimmicks are being played, bankruptcies there, all the way from the town to the state level through Chicago, let's pick on Greece. What's going on in Greece, and are there similarities there too?
There are similarities. Greece is bankrupt. The funny thing is, I just heard today the German minister Schäuble came out and said, well, if Greece doesn't do this, they're bankrupt. I'm saying if Greece doesn't agree to the plan, they're bankrupt. Greece is already bankrupt. The question is, when do we admit it? It's not a question of Greece going bankrupt. It's a question of when we admit that Greece is bankrupt. It looks like it might have come to a head today. I don't know. We've seen all these rumors over the last week about a deal. Tsipras, the Greek prime minister, said, well, a deal's in the work. We're closer to a deal than we've ever been before. And I like the way he put that. We're closer to a deal than we've ever been before. That doesn't mean a deal is close. It just means if they were 2 miles away yesterday, they might be 1 inch closer today. That's what I think happened. And they're very good at wordsmithing things. He was asked about whether or not they would make their debt payment to the IMF this month, at the beginning of the month. And he answered, I wouldn't worry about that. The very next day, they missed the payment. He didn't say, we're going to make the payment. He just said, don't worry about it. So, that's the kind of stuff that's going on. But in the back of my mind, Gordon, I have to wonder if Greece is purposely dragging all this stuff out as long as they can to allow Greek citizens to pull their money out of banks. He can't come out and say, pull your money out of the banks, Or because if he says that, they will shut off the emergency liquidity assistance. So money's just been slowly draining out of Greek banks. Of the year, it actually sped up at the beginning of the year as soon as they were elected. So only the real dumb money is left. So, and then today, he was still talking about an agreement. The IMF walked out of a meeting today and said, there's nothing more to discuss. It almost sounds like if it's what's the right word, to take it or leave it offer. The problem, and I believe it is, the problem is Germany doesn't want to say take it or leave it, because then they'll get accused of kicking them out of the ECB. So everyone's playing these word games, to avoid the responsibility of getting the big point. You did it. You're responsible. The politicians want to avoid the point, the finger point. So meanwhile, the situation is dragging on here, and we'll see. And the question keeps coming up. People keep asking me all the time, well, why doesn't Greece just default and stay on the euro? And I proposed back in December that Greece actually could do that. And it all depends on whether or not they collect enough money in taxes to pay their budget. In 2014, they had not counting interest on debt and not counting debt repayments, they actually had a primary balance surplus. So they could have done it. But it vanished immediately when Tsipras got elected. People stopped paying their bills because they assumed there was going to be some sort of debt jubilee, I guess. So he made it sound, tell him whatever you want to get elected. He made it sound as if something like that was going to happen. So Greek citizens stopped paying their bills. It's nothing new to Greece. So they've got this deficit now. There's an interesting wild card in all of this. And that is, so anyway, they could stay in the euro, but they would have to do some of those things that they don't want to do. Cut pensions, reform, or they can turn to Russia. Is Russia willing to offer Greece any help?
Mish, that's what I was going to say earlier. When the way they're dragging it out so that the Greeks can actually pull their money out of the banks, to me, on a number of things, and just having seen the G8, now called the G7, and the complaints that were coming out of it about, the sanctions against Russia are hurting Europe, I sense Putin blowing in Greece's ear a strategy for the negotiations, and are prepared to do something at some point, they being Russia.
They've already agreed to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
When Tsipras walked out of the meeting, so not only did the IMF walk out today, Tsipras actually walked out of a meeting last week. They're way too confident. And flew back home to Greek Parliament to quell a revolt from within his own party about some pension cuts that they thought that he might do. He actually had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and they agreed to meet. I think it's on the 18th of this month.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more going on than just a meeting. They're further along because Putin is very effectively now bringing a lot of pressure on Obama, on the G7 as a group, and certainly Europe specifically. So I think he's playing this card potentially extremely well.
I think so too, and I think Tsipras played his cards well. Yep. He hired a game master as his finance minister, and everyone said the ECB would just run roughshod over these guys. Guess what? They didn't. And so, we've seen some concessions, but they weren't the concessions that Tsipras wanted or that his party would go along with. So here we are. And unless one party caves in, and with the IMF walking out of a meeting, it doesn't seem likely at this point, but you never know. Because although Russia's a wild card, the U.S. is a wild card. The U.S. is scared to death to have Russia, back in Greece and to lose influence over that area of the region. So the U.S. no doubt is, pressuring Merkel, to make some concessions. And they keep making them, but they're small. no one really wants to admit, and this is all at the heart of the problem, no one really wants to admit that Greece is bankrupt and cannot pay back the 330 billion euros that it's borrowed. And Germany came out today and said, well, the European taxpayers have been very beneficial to Greece. And I looked at that and said, what? You know, they stuck Greece with $300 billion worth of alleged bailouts just so Greece could pay back the bondholders. And now, you know, Greece has to pay back that $300 billion. What good did this do to Greece? The only way Greece can get any good out of European taxpayers is actually to default. And notice that all of this $320 billion, very little of it is left at exposure at the banks now. It's all with private bondholders. It's with the ECB, and who's going to have to? It's with Target 2, which is a deficit liability between banks. So that's also on the ECB. And if Greece walks away, who has to fund that? That is the taxpayers. But to make the claim right now, as Germany did, that the taxpayers have already been generous, no, they haven't. They've not forgiven anything.
Mish, we're up against our hard line, but one quick question before we go. On the U.S., is there a recession on the horizon in the United States? Is that a possibility?
I think so. I thought there was a distinct possibility we were in one. Retail sales figures today said no, not yet. But so the Atlanta Fed GDP Now model upped its GDP estimate for the second quarter to plus 1.9. I'm wondering if that's as good as it goes. But average that with the first quarter of -7, and you're well below the stall rate, which is about 2%. And we're also seeing that what kicked up GDP in retail sales is actually auto loans. Those are subprime. At some point, that is going to end. Year over year, general merchandise sales are down. Ex-auto, year over year, retail sales are only up 1%. So the retail sales numbers look actually pretty shaky in spite of the alleged exceptionally good number today. So, and also we need to see if that holds up next month or for the quarter, or what the trade deficit looks like now that gasoline prices are hiking. I'm not saying, I think the U.S. is still possibly in recession, but certainly close to it, even if we skirt it this quarter.
Mish, thank you very much for the time. Always enjoy the discussions. Always like to hear it. You have the strong views on things, and I'm sure our listeners enjoy them just as much as I do. We'll have you back again. It's not too distant future, and talk to you then.
Pleasure to be back on the show. Just have everyone do a Google search for Mish.
Talk to you then. Bye.
This has been Gordon T. Long, editor and publisher of GordonTLong.com. New recordings are posted regularly and can be found at GordonTLong.com. New show notifications are available through RSS feed, iTunes, and other social networking venues at GordonTLong.com.